forward. No errors? For what? All right, so stop the live.
Oh, you going live on Facebook? That's what you mean?
No, we go live on YouTube.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
See, that's how I stitched that together.
Yeah.
All wrong.
No, it's fine. But you used to be on Facebook.
Yeah, I thought so.
Office, when we had the office?
No, I didn't
Okay.
know. Christian was already working home, I thought.
Okay. No, we had 2 offices.
Okay. And then you got one coming up.
Yeah. Hello. All right. You comfortable? You see what you look like. What you and that heater doing don't look right, bro. Don't look like you should be doing it in a sanctuary. That's for sure. All right. So this is you know how they say you have a meeting before the meeting?
Mm-hmm.
This is the show before the show.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So with me today is my good friend, Clint. How you doing?
I'm doing well, Christian.
Yeah?
And how are you, man?
I'm good.
Awesome.
I'm good. So, Clint, you know a little bit about me.
A little bit.
Yeah. Why do you know a little bit about me?
Because you've shared it with me.
Yeah. So Clint was my sponsor for almost 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And then he decided that I needed professional help, and it told me, gave me $150 to go see a therapist. No, I'm just kidding.
Wow.
No, but I mean, what I always tell people is like, you know, I think that our sponsor-sponsee relationship was the first, like, real sponsor-sponsee relationship I had, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about that's at like 9 years of recovery. I don't recommend it for people,
Right.
but it, you know, it showed me how to be authentic, how to be transparent,
Mm-hmm.
how to not hide my little thoughts and thinking, and you held that space really well to allow me to start letting a little bit of what I would call my crazy out, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the level of vulnerability it takes to get better, I know from my own experience with my sponsors, it is like radically honest.
Yeah.
To a point where it's like, these thoughts should never come out of my head. When really, you gotta get to that level, or else no level of control will exist.
Mm.
It won't be possible to change your thoughts when you don't know what your thoughts are.
Yeah, right. So you have to
know.
call them out.
Right, and also, you ever get in a spot where the thinking's dark and negative and stuff like that, and the solution's simple. Tell it to someone, and that's literally how you let the light in.
Yeah.
You know, it took me, I think, 7 years until I had a sponsor who showed me the beauty of steps 6 and 7.
Oh, yeah.
When you get into that thoughts.
Yeah.
Kind of thing, because I was always asking the prior ones, and they said, no, you just do exactly what's in the book, and that makes sense, but it's very vague, and that's why the 12 and 12 expanded on it.
Yeah.
You know, for
Yeah.
6 and 7 specifically.
Yeah, I think the longer that I've stayed sober, the more I think rests on 6 and 7.
Right.
It's kind of the fulcrum of where everything turns. And I do think, like, we went through this book called Drop the Rock.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's where it really kind of opened. I said, oh my gosh, like 6 and 7, this is an important process that I kind of always glossed over. Even 6, like that list.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
I just kind of glossed over that.
And, you know, there's another aspect, and I'm going to reflect back something, if it's okay with what you said. You said that I was the first sponsor that you did that with. You were the first sponsee to open up at that level.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, because some people, they don't get it, or they're not ready to hear it.
Yeah.
or can't hear it, and you just were willing. And if there were any changes because of your willingness that made the change.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I hear you. You know, you're kind of contractually obligated to say that as a sponsor.
I'm not. I'm not a good sponsor in that regard. I, you know me.
But I do think, like, because you opened that space up, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it wasn't like you drew it out of me or confronted it. And I think previous sponsors were a little more, you know, I've had ones who were, you know, right by the book,
Mm.
you know, and then I've had some who are, I don't go through the book,
Mm.
you know, and I have had a sponsor where I would call him and he would complain to me about his life. And, but I still had a sponsor. Like, a bad sponsor is better than no sponsor.
It is.
I think it's, I mean, I don't know. I guess you could probably take that both ways, but
I guess it depends on the issue,
Yeah.
right? Because if nothing else, if I have a sponsor, not just a namesake, but someone that I'm calling, if they're not graded, really where the blessing is my willingness to share. Because it's me, it's what I hear myself saying.
yeah,
You know, it's how I attuned to what truth was.
yeah,
I had to say it.
yeah. There's something very powerful about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, and we were sharing before the show that, like, you know, I'd always kind of compartmentalized my thinking from my drinking, right? And so I thought, well, because I'm not thinking of drinking,
Right.
this is not relative to my recovery. Therefore, it's mine to kind of deal with, you know, which also is like goes to like a kind of falsehood that I had in religion, that I felt like, well, the bad stuff was up to me to deal with. God only wanted the good, right? And it had to be exhibited to me through relationship that, oh, like I can, you know, these things that are quote unquote bad,
Mm-hmm.
they're actually the thing that's going to get me through to the next level.
Yeah, absolutely.
So where was that exhibited to you? When did you really, did someone show you that, hey, all that thinking, it needs to be exposed?
Yeah, it was actually my third sponsor moving to Alpharetta, and he's passed on now. But he's the one who sat down and showed me how important it was. And so, yes, we use the lists in the big book exactly as it was for step 4. But then we really, really spent quite a bit of time getting down to the themes of my life that kept playing over and over. And I had come to a point where I could almost see it. But I was someone before, even though it was my truth, I would share stuff that I pre-cleaned to my sponsor.
Oh, I know what you're talking
And he
about.
created and you know, when I chose him to be a sponsor, it's because he was a mighty man of God in my eyes, and I was afraid. And he just, you know, created this safe space where I could say anything.
Oh, yeah.
And wow,
Yeah, yeah.
you know, it just, I can't tell you, I am not who I was before,
Yeah.
you know.
Yeah, and I would say that was my experience with you, is that you kind of created this safe space. And, you know, we've been hanging out a little bit last week or so, and it's been cool just kicking it with you. You know?
Yeah, I've enjoyed that
And
too.
you know, our humor is sick and twisted, and we've laughed a lot. And we almost died because a tree fell on the house, but
Yeah.
So this guy kind of opens it up, and I totally get what you mean about pre-cleaning.
Yeah.
And you know, there's a time for that, right? Like maybe in a meeting you want to pre-clean because you want to be helpful to someone who might be in a really bad spot, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
But in that sponsor-sponsee relationship, that's the place, right? But I think a lot of us, I think it's almost like steps, right? Before you're even at the point where you pre-clean, you have to first be aware that there's anything to clean, right? Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
so some people, they're just not aware that these thought patterns
Right.
or false beliefs exist, right?
Well, you know, because in my life, I spent so much time trying to get people to love me, you know, and that there were right ways to think, right ways to speak. And so I had to clean it up because I couldn't handle my mess, so you certainly couldn't,
Right.
right? And that's just wrong, you know. I've been blessed mostly with incredible sponsorship, but not always, you know. And so I just came to a point, it's like, you know what? Rather than dealing with what should be, I need to deal with what is.
Yeah, that's good. Rather than dealing with what should be, I need to deal with what is.
Yeah. So what is my thinking? Not what should my thinking be. And if I clean it up beforehand, that means that I'm sharing something after I've exercised my will upon it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's already it's gone through a faulty filter to get to that point. Yeah.
Yeah, because the thinking's off.
Right.
I can't clean my own thinking up.
Yeah.
But AA gave steps by which, if I just do them honestly with another person in recovery,
Yeah.
just something magical happens, man.
Yeah. I mean, the steps are really a great framework for any kind of transformation. The only caveat with the steps is that step one is that I think people have to come to some sense of like unmanageability. They have to have this willingness to go through the process.
Yeah,
know?
absolutely.
I had a coaching client and older woman, and we talked, we did our first initial, and I said, I really think steps are going to help you with this. And so we went through, Richard Rohr has a book called Breathing Underwater.
Mm-hmm.
Did you read that book?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, let's go through Richard Rohr, Breathing Underwater. And she's a Methodist, right? So her first thing was like, oh, Richard Rohr, I've heard things.
Oh.
He's a Franciscan priest, but he's kind of, but I don't think you tell a lie. Anyway, I said, well, let's just try the book. And then if you don't like it, there's other books that are just step stuff. And it ended up becoming a pretty profound experience for her. But because she had kind of reached a point that there was a cycle of thinking in her life that she was like, I don't want that anymore. Like, it's making me suffer.
Yeah.
And so that step one was clear for her. Yeah, my life is unmanageable and I need to do something about it, you know. And I think that's the only caveat to the steps, because people, if you don't really accept that, then you're probably not going to follow through with the rest.
Yeah, absolutely. And then there's a catch-22, right? So I come to AA. I used to drink because I was afraid of people, wanted to fit in, whatever that is, right? And I need people to recover. And not only do I need help from people, and I have to accept help, but I have to help others. There's a lot of people involved. And without alcohol, you know, I was like, I'm not so sure this is going to work, but I did it honestly. In prior attempts to recover, I wouldn't have said it was over alcohol because I never saw nothing wrong with that. But, you know, things like depression, anxiety, whatever, I get self-help books and read through and be like, wow, this is just game-changing. This is incredible knowledge, all that kind of stuff. And what was I saying?
Well, you would read these self-help books to try to give
And then
you.
I would get to the exercise part where it asks the questions. I'd be like, I don't need to do that.
Yeah.
And I think I would have done the same thing if I would have done the big book on my own. I would have gone to the steps and be like, well, that was really interesting. You know. I also will say this. When I read it and really read it, I misunderstood everything about them. They're not difficult to do. Doesn't mean that I wasn't afraid doing it. They're really simple.
Yeah.
The way it was laid out. You know?
Yeah, and that's kind of the problem with it, you know, is it's so straightforward, and you know, I want to be special and unique, and you know, these steps don't work, or let me twist it in this way, or let me read an alternative version of these, you know, and fighting it kind of all the way, and I tell people, like, one thing I have done since getting sober is I go through the steps almost every year. I go through the steps. And sometimes it's like codependency, like we went through the steps going over codependency.
Right.
It might be sex addiction. It might be just going through the steps again in the same way I went through them the year before.
Right.
But every time I go through it, it's I take time longer on each step
Right.
because I'm trying to sink past what the, and then I had a sponsor who said, you don't need to go dig up any old bones. Like if you've went through things and you put them to bed and you're at peace with it,
Yeah.
we don't need to go over that again.
Right. Because I had that question with my first sponsor. How do I know what to list? He said, look, you're 41. I don't want every single nook and cranny that you've done unless you still have feelings about it.
Yeah.
And I said, well, suppose I miss something. You're not going to. Because he sat me down, showed me, pray, make space for this, and just sit.
Yeah.
Don't make up stuff, let your hand write kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So the instructions are to just sit, have the space,
Pray.
pray,
Mhm.
pray.
Because that just invites, or if not, it doesn't invite the divine in, because the divine's everywhere always. But it certainly makes my will attuned to his presence.
Yeah, right. Prayer changes us more than it changes God, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. And then letting that thing kind of flow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think some people are different. They need, and I've heard instances where, you have to sit with your sponsor to write things down, right? Or like you're only really productive when they're sitting in the other room or whatever,
Yeah, I mean, with that, I understand that they want to, sometimes it is best to let them sit there. But I've even sponsored people who couldn't read.
Yeah.
They can't write
Yeah.
the steps. So
Yeah.
I sat there and did it. Well, teach them how to read using the big book, too.
Oh, yeah, there's a lot of big words in there.
It is, but, you'll probably only do like half a page the first couple times
Yeah.
you meet, because you're learning. But
Yeah.
it's a great, it's a great tool.
Yeah. So when we first started working together, and what was the thing that you wished I knew about myself the most when we first started?
I wish that you could see something that I knew you couldn't.
Uh-huh.
I wish that you could see the way in which you loved others, and that you would allow others to love you, and that one day you would love yourself. The ill part of me is like, oh, I'm not supposed to love myself. Oh,
Right.
yes, I cannot love someone else truly unless I love myself.
Yeah.
If I work on that, loving others just flows naturally.
Yeah.
And I wish that you could see that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think in a lot of ways I've opened myself to that now.
Absolutely.
I see it now. But at the time it was like a taboo thing, I thought self-love was just masturbation, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
honestly, like,
Mhm.
and I had no real way to navigate how do I care for myself? What do I even, when we did the codependency work, it was the first time I thought, oh, I can say no.
Mm-hmm.
Or I can go, I don't want to do that. I don't even have to have a reason. I can just be like, nah, I don't want to do that. I mean, like in my professional life and in certain areas of my life, I could just be like, nah, I don't need to do that.
Yeah, because before I would always need to try to explain why, hoping they'd get it. But it doesn't matter. It's my decision.
Yeah.
Right now, of course, hopefully I'm doing work, preparing myself in the morning, prayer, meditation, whatever, by which that decision that I make will be more in line with God's will than mine.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah.
The other thing I remember you saying was really has stayed with me is to let people love you how they want to love you,
Yeah.
how they choose to love you.
Yeah, I wanted someone out there, or maybe everyone, to be honest, to love me 100% and only in the ways in which I wanted.
We got Tony's over here just messing with stuff. Just unplug it.
Your pacemaker's going
My
off, Christian.
pacemaker. Tony's pacemaker's going off over there. Get a defibrillator. Yeah, like we want people like it was often a struggle for me
Yeah.
because people were loving me the way they felt, the way they loved people. I was rejecting it because it wasn't how I think it should have came to me.
Absolutely.
So here I am kind of like in this vacuum, you know. And so that's why it's such a profound statement to go, let people love you the way they love you. because then I open myself up to that, and then gratitude starts to come. Then I realize, oh, there is love in this world. There is love that I can access, and I can give it to myself, and I can then give that authentic love to others.
Right. And also, when I finally allow myself to love myself, my demand that you love me in a certain way dissolves. It's not even anymore. It has to be this way. It's like, oh, I don't even need that.
Yeah.
I don't know what that was about, but I don't need that.
Right.
You know? So,
Yeah. It used to be a big fight at my house with my wife, because I always wanted us to go to bed together at the same time.
mm,
And she likes sometimes to, she'll go, I'll be there in a minute. And then, an hour or two later, she comes up. And I'd be sitting there stewing, and this sounds like a really silly example.
It's
but
not, though.
But I learned, I said, I can watch whatever I want to watch. And if I get tired, I can go to sleep. And realizing that she needs her space and time too, whatever she's doing down there. And, she likes to watch shows and just veg out, right? And that's her way of kind of decompressing from the day. And so, but it was so hard because I just couldn't see it. All I could see was myself and how I'm being deprived of what I really need, which is connection and physical affection and touch and having somebody close to me, and coming to the realization is like that what she wants also has value, right? And when I started to let go of those expectations, I began to receive the very thing that I was wanting.
Right. And also my demand that you accept my love in the way that I give it goes away too.
Yeah.
Because how dare the people around us, whether they be parents, siblings, co-workers, significant others, friends, how dare they actually be people that are not just extensions of me? You know?
Yes, right.
And by working this program to the best of my ability, I usually am able to do that. I do have some push buttons that if they get pushed, I get weird, but they're much less than they used to be.
Yeah, it's the buttons are the effect of it is shorter lived. I'm able to kind of course correct internally quicker, right? Which means I might need to clean up a mess, right? Sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, I mean, the just opening up to these levels of thinking and stuff, I think has been a profound experience, because I think I was a miserable sober person for a long time. I was just miserably pushing myself through it because this is what I should do. This is what I ought to do. This is the right thing to do, and this is what they tell me I need to do. And what ended up happening is I ended up kind of developing this little secret cave I would retreat to internally, that was full of resentment and anger towards everybody that I could never express because it's not what you should do. You know what I mean? Like it was a trap in my own self.
It is. I mean, that's one of the things the illness does, right? It keeps us isolated. That's not always a physical isolation.
Right.
It's a mental one.
That's what it was. I could be in the room with my family and not be there.
Right, and love them, but just cannot show up because there's too much back in that wagon that I'm still dragging along with me.
Yeah.
Because I never got rid of it, and I keep adding to it.
Yeah.
That's hard.
Yeah.
Because I've been there in recovery. Actually, the time when I decided to relapse for 9 months, which, by the way, was an incredible experience in stupidity, but I learned a lot, right? Because I've been through painful moments since then, and I just had to ask myself, okay, that time when you were depressed and anxious about losing a relationship and you relapse, what happened to depression, anxiety? It instantly got worse.
Yeah.
And so it just doesn't help.
No.
But that knowledge is not enough. Doing the work that you began talking about, that's where the money is.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you for opening making that space so that I could do that.
Yeah.
I think it's made me better at sitting with other people and seeing it and going and letting some silence.
Right.
The power of just letting someone sit there in silence. They'll tell on themselves real quick because they can't stand the silence. To just sit there and go, wait, and then they'll tell on themselves for sure. Because it's like it wants to come out, right? And the thing is I don't think I was ever in an environment that wasn't safe to do that. It was just me keeping myself from doing it.
Yeah, that's usually it. For whatever reason, you decided it was time for you to do it.
Well, I was too miserable.
Yeah.
That's really what it was. The misery was too much. I didn't want to deal with it anymore.
Well, yeah, and it's not like you woke up one day and said, "Oh, this is the way I'm gonna be." You got messages all along the way in life, just like everyone does. And that's how we end up being, And it seemed like you just got to a point where it's like, you know what? I'm the only one who could change this.
Yeah.
It's no one's fault around me that I am who I am. It's who I chose to be. And that just means I'm one decision away from being different.
Yeah, right.
So,
All right, so the last thing before we bring Dr. Zach on, what was the thing about the screen and the movie theater?
oh, I don't know.
You were like, you're in a movie theater watching a movie.
Oh, yeah.
Are you the observer, the projector, or the screen?
Right. Yeah,
and then you left that question, and that was what you asked.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're like, just get back to me on that.
All right.
And I think observer, no. Projector, no. And then you were like, I was the screen, right?
Yeah.
Do you remember that?
Yeah. Life's
So break that
projecting
down.
on-
Break that down.
If I could remember, I went through that whole long COVID thing.
Yeah.
So if I forget, you may have to prompt me. But for me, I spent so much of my life trying to project onto the world, or even be the actioner of things, the projector. And really, the world was just shining on me.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't even have to react to any of that, what was going on.
Oh, yeah.
Because I was in crisis mode, and everything was a reaction.
Yeah.
And I just needed to realize and stand there and have humility and say, guess what? This world goes on even if I'm not here. So since I'm here.
Yeah. That's what it means to be the screen.
Yes.
It's to be unaffected by the projection that's projected. And to be.
Right. I'm okay regardless of what's going on around me. Almost.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. If there's a fire, we all run it.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm not.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I'm glad we got to get you on. We'd always talked about doing something together.
Yeah.
And so thank you for hanging out, and thank you for all the love for those years. Greatly appreciate you. And I'm sure my wife thanks you too. So.
Yeah, and thank you, and also Leslie for everything.
Yeah, brother.
You guys have really been game changers in my life.
Yeah.
And I didn't see that coming.
Yeah. Amen.
Yeah. Man.
Cool.
Okay.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah.
All right, let's get Dr. Zach, who's just been on a wild ride, traveling the streets of Tennessee.
Boy, I tell you what, I was fast and furious in my son's truck today.
Oh yeah, you figured out how fast it'll go?
$2,500 Magnum, no sleep on it now.
Yeah.
Oh, God, sure had to too.
Yeah, that's all. It's only
It's good.
set up for two. Yeah, yeah.
All right.
You want to settle in?
Well, I was doing some breathing on the way here,
Yeah, yeah,
Some deep breathing, get that CO2 built up and
yeah.
relax. And I apologize ahead of time. I'm a little stuffy, some allergies going on, but
Okay.
hopefully
Yeah.
I'll do it. But
Well, I'm glad you're here. You made it.
thank you. I
Yeah.
appreciate your patience.
You got some water?
Yep.
Yeah, it ended up working out. We all hung out, ate some pizza, talked, and it was pretty cool. So
Yeah, well, I mean, that was kind of my plan, is give you guys some time to get some community and
right, yeah.
relation going, some
Yeah.
fellowship.
yeah,
Yeah.
that was good. It went well. That was a good plan of yours.
Hey, I hate to just jump back in, but when you guys were talking, something kind of caught my ear about the isolation or being around family.
Yeah.
And you're there, but you're not,
Yeah,
right? And it's like you love them, right? And my assumption is, this is in relation to substance use or abuse, and it throws that. And one of the reasons for that we found, just from a neurological standpoint, is that the more we use any kind of substance that releases that dopamine, that reward, right? The more our body gets used to that, then things that are natural rewards. So things that like the things we think like food, sex, love, right? We see a family, we have less of a response to those natural rewards, right? Yeah. So we are less reactive to that. So whereas some people would go and see their family, give them a hug, and have that release of that reward, that motivation, right? Because of all the substances and overusing that dopamine, it just doesn't affect us as much. So we're sitting there like kind of numb, like I love my family. Why am I not, why don't I feel that sense of pleasure around them? Yeah. And oftentimes it gets misinterpreted by family members as you don't care, you're aloof, you're never present, you even love us. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, so is that, because one of the things we were talking about was kind of that path out of that, right? Mm-hmm. And how talking about it and exposing those thinking and those false beliefs, gave me relief from that, and we've seen it give others relief. Mm-hmm. So what do you think when someone is in that process, right? We have to do an intro at the end. So, but
I'm sorry, I just
no, I love
apologize.
it. Let's keep going. But when someone's in that process, like what's happening neurologically when these conversations are being had, because it feels like they're shifting, and all of a sudden you find yourself being more present, right? Are those dopamine receptors resetting? What's happening neurologically that we're getting relief through this kind of community or talk therapy or something like that?
Yeah. So a few things are happening, right? So essentially what happens is it's a learning process, right? So whenever we become addicted to a substance or use, we learn that these things bring us reward. Okay. And it feels good. Yeah. Right? So some people may be familiar with the dopamine reward system. Yeah. Right? So for those of you who aren't familiar, dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's a fancy way of saying neuro, which means of the brain, right? Yeah. And transmitter because it transmits messages. Neurotransmitters transmit messages, right, in between brain cells. And our brain cells, the human brain, I was kind of start with this, and I know it's going to be a long way around to get to your question, but just some background information for the audience to understand. We have, on average, and I think I've asked this question, let's see if you remember, speaking of memory, our brain is about 3.5 pounds, fits the size of our head, right? It's about. It's actually a pretty accurate size of the human brain, right? This is upside down, but Yeah. So how many brain cells we got to make up that little thing?
I do remember the answer to this. Is it 7 billion?
Close. It's about 80 to 100 billion.
Oh shit! 80 to 100 billion?
80 to 100 billion, right?
These are neurological connections.
These aren't even just the connections. These are just our brain cells. The number of neural branches we have, right? So now connections. Now our brain cells, right? They have to communicate with each other. Right. They have to transmit messages to each other, so that it can coordinate everything that we do in life, right? So right now I'm moving my hand. What to think about, but I'm moving my hand. I have tens of thousands of neurons that are coordinated. I had a thought, move your hand. Yeah. Right? Subconscious or not. I had a thought, move my hand. Now we have to put a program in place that executes that plan, right? So we have a part of our brain in the frontal area. Try to get Nas if he stays together here. It's called the primary motor cortex.
You getting that on the shot? Yeah.
Right? Primary motor cortex. And what that does is that plans that motor movement. It finds a part of our arm that we want to move. Now it sends that information back to our brainstem, down to our spine, through our arm, coordinates that movement. And then information gets sent back up to the brain, to back here, to somatosensory, that senses what we're doing in space to say, hey, that plan's running okay, right? Or to adjust it. And then it goes back to motor cortex to adjust, right? Whoa. And it happens quickly.
Very quickly.
Right? Yeah. So to do that, we have to have these connections. Yeah. And each neuron, each brain cell can have tens of thousands of connections. Yeah. So when we sit down and do the math, we're looking at hundreds and trillions of connections. Wow. Right? 100 trillion, like just fathom that number for a second.
Yeah, I can't even.
Right? That little brain, right?
Isn't that like the nation's debt?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we're never getting out. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's Einstein. I believe it was Einstein whose estimate was about that's more stars than he estimated in our galaxy universe, right? So 100 trillion.
Yeah.
So brain is very complex.
Yeah.
One of the complex things it does is it learns, right? And the way we learn particular drug use is through association, right? So we try something, makes us feel good, right? And then when that feels good, our brain remembers, hey, that thing made us feel good. Let's remember it for next time,
Yeah.
right? So draw these connections. So one of the common examples is Pavlov's dogs, who he found out that if you presented dogs with food, right, they salivated.
Yeah.
They would even salivate in anticipation of the food, right? So remember that? And then what he did is he started pairing a bell. Every time he brought the food out, he'd ring a bell. So dogs would see the food, they'd hear the bell, and he started to associate the bell with the food.
Yeah.
Then he started ringing the bell without delivering the food, right? And every time he rang the bell, they would start to salivate. Now, dogs aren't going to salivate just because they hear a bell. It's not the right response.
Right.
But it got associated
Conditioned. They got conditioned.
with it. Exactly, conditioned.
Yeah.
Right? A more modern example is dog trainers. The clicker,
Yeah.
right? Every time they want the dog to do something, to teach something, they'll click. But when they click, they give it a treat. So now the dog is associating the clicker with the treat. So when they use the clicker, the dog will do whatever it is the command is.
Yeah. Because associating the click with a positive response.
Exactly. So when we start to use substances, whatever they may be, your drug of choice or choices, things that we are doing while doing that, the places we are, the people we're with, the things that we smell, the sights that we see.
All that's getting getting stored as these are all. Yeah.
Yeah. So they're all getting associated. They're cues,
Yeah.
right? So remember I said the dogs will salivate in anticipation of the food.
Yeah.
When we see things, especially when we're in our stages of sobriety early on, and one of the recommendations people will say is, hey, you kind of drop the friends you're hanging out with. You don't go to the same places that you did, right?
People, places, and things.
Yeah.
Change those things.
Right? Because they're cues. So there's a part of our brain called a ventral tegmental area.
Ventral tegmental.
Yep, ventral tegmental.
That sounds like a punk band.
Dude, it's VTA, right? Not
Oh,
GTA for our kids out
VTA,
there,
yeah.
but VTA, yeah. So it sits right up here in this area of our pons and the brainstem.
Okay.
Right? What happens is whenever there's a cue, that thing lights up. And it says, hey, there's something rewarding here. Something's going to be good. Let's activate that dopamine and send it to another part of our brain up in the frontal lobes that's more kind of medial called the nucleus accumbens, N-A-C-C, right? Now, that nucleus accumbens, when that gets lit up, that's where all the pleasure comes from. Anytime we do something pleasurable, man, that thing's lighting up.
Okay.
All right? So that VTA, what it does down here is if it sees a cue in anticipation, like you smell something, you hear something, your sensor's like, hey, dude, we're about to do it, right?
Yeah.
Then it gets excited, right? It's like that food's coming out, you anticipate it, you start to drool, right?
Right.
And then we start seeking. That's the craving,
Yeah.
all right? That's that craving we have.
Yeah. Because the cue's hitting. Right. Which is why you can experience craving even though you haven't used a substance in a while.
Yep.
Because somewhere your brain picked up a cue.
Yep, exactly. Yeah. Right. So when you're talking about talk therapy, some of the things you'll find out is like, hey, what are your cues? What are your triggers?
Yeah.
Right. Because just the way we learn those, dissociate them, then we can start to unlearn them.
So is this where we're getting into mind over matter?
How do you mean?
Well, because if I'm basically like this physical reaction is happening, right? Automatically. But then I'm reinterpreting that. I'm framing it now. So I'm saying if that cue comes, whatever it is, like, it used to be hotel was really triggering, right? And so, but then I begin to reframe it because I get new memories, right? Is that changing? Is there physical change happening because I'm reinterpreting the cue and saying I'm assigning a different value to it now?
Yeah.
So then, okay. So then, who is the one assigning the value? If it's my brain.
What do you mean? So go ahead.
So like if my brain is pretty much doing this, right? But there's some entity that's reframing these things. Is there a part of my brain that's doing that reframing?
Yes. So that's where the wrinkly parts of our brain come in. It's cortex, right?
Yeah.
So most people think of the brain, they think about these wrinkly parts that sit on top,
Yeah.
right? That's our thinking brain. Some people talk about like Daniel Kahneman and our thinking brain and our reactive brain, our emotional brain, right? So whenever the pleasure and all those kind of things are more of our primal brain, the things that develop first, right? Things keep us alive, that let us, tell us when we're hungry, when we are in a situation where there might be danger. Things regulate our mood, our emotions, and our.
That's why it's kind of deeper in the
deeper in
stem.
there.
Yeah.
So that reacts before our thinking brain usually even has a chance.
Okay.
Right. So when we start activating our thinking brain, right, that's when we're sitting down in therapy, and that's when we're using that. And this front part of our brain, the frontal lobes, man, this Nos is not holding up on me, but
Yeah, Nas is falling apart. It looks like my mind.
look, dude, this is like a couple of years ago for me, right? So this is kind of that base of brain. I'm just gonna hold this up so easier. Well, maybe. There we go. Lord help me. Yeah, it's fine. So anyways, so this front part of our brains, right, our frontal lobes, they sit up here. And they're called frontal lobes because they sit in the front, right? These are parts that are kind of the seat of our intelligence, right? It's our ability to plan, to problem solve, to weigh risk, right?
Okay.
To resist things, to inhibit them. So, for example, when we are wanting to become sober, right, those cues come up, right? And our primal brain is like, oh man, let's go get that pleasure, right? And then when we're doing talk therapy, our frontal brain is going to say like, whoa, 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 let's think about this.
Okay.
All right.
Now, does that get dulled during substance use?
It does. So what happens is when we're using substances and releasing all that dopamine, our frontal lobes start to actually atrophy. And that's just a fancy way to say start to shrink.
Because we're not accessing it anymore. We're just like little machines wanting to get what we want when we want it, how we want it.
Part of it is if you don't use it, you lose it. But part of it is also the effects of the chemicals of the substance.
Yeah.
Right. So not only are we now having this increased drive to seek and want that pleasure, right, that substance, but the part of our brain that typically keeps us from doing those things, like the brakes, right, our little what's the cricket's name, Jiminy Cricket, right?
Yeah.
It's like whoa, talking in your ear, it's getting smaller. That voice is getting softer and softer and softer.
Yeah.
So then it's like this. It's this.
So talk therapy is actually, it's kind of like it's building that part of your brain back up.
It's getting that thinking brain, right? So it's saying, hey, you know what? Now that you've learned to associate these cues, right, things that normally aren't associated with the place, right? So anytime, you mentioned hotels.
Yeah.
Right? Big problem. That's hotel parties and all that, right?
Yeah.
So most people who drive by a hotel don't notice anything.
Yeah.
Right? Because by itself, that hotel shouldn't really give any emotional response. It's neutral.
Yeah.
But since your brain is associated with the pleasure and things and memories you did during that, that's when you get that response.
Yeah.
Kind of like the bell and the food.
Oh, yeah.
So what happens when you stop bringing the food with the bell after a while?
Well, after a while, the association will change, right?
Yeah. Now the dogs stop responding to the bell the same way because food hasn't been coming with it.
Yeah.
So one of the things that sobriety does is the more times that you avoid that, right, then it stops having that same power over you, right? The other thing is now you talk therapy to like unlearn that. So, and this kind of, let's get back to it. So that frontal lobe hits, we get that anticipation of the cue through that brain part, VTA. It sends the dopamine release that nucleus comes up in the frontal lobes, release that pleasure reward, right? Now that goes to a couple areas. That then goes down to our memory centers and associates that feeling with our memory. And that's where the association occurs. So we have to unlearn that. And how do we unlearn that is by substituting in something different or realizing, hey, the reason why you're having that, let me say this. So like for me, I was an alcoholic. I did other things, but my primary thing was alcohol, right? I used alcohol for a lot of different reasons. Some of it's genetic, family background, but a lot of it I realized was untreated depression, anxiety. I have ADHD as well. And so I'd use it to self-medicate. And it's anti-anxiolytic, right? Yeah. So what happens is if I start to feel anxious or my mood was shifting because I was dealing with some trauma stuff or whatever, I would drink alcohol, right? And that anxiety, that anxious would kind of go away.
Yeah.
Right? So now my brain is saying, hey, you know what? When we feel this, we don't like feeling bad, right?
Yeah.
When we feel this, if we drink or use whatever, then that goes away. And now we're reinforced. We want to do it even more.
Right.
It's called negative reinforcement. Negative is something that we take away that negative thing.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So instead, now what we have to do through talk therapy is like, all right, hey, we got to deal with that anxiety. You can't use drinking. You do have medication. Now let's sit with it. Let's process it. Let's talk about what's making you anxious. Let's give you some strategies to deal with that anxiety, that panic attack in a moment, right? Because then over time, what we're teaching our brain is the thing that we are feeling threatened by, whatever it is, really isn't a threat, right? So that's just kind of talk to we're kind of unlearning, breaking those associations. Does that make sense? I know when
I think it does, absolutely, because I would have never have thought but that's, I feel like, what happens, right? Like, whether it's with a therapist or with a sponsor or with just a good friend or someone who really gets you and you can talk this stuff out. Like, I can see in talking, patterns can get broken, and it is usually in time, because usually you can have that epiphany or the revelation and go, oh, okay. But it usually takes a while to stick, right? And so what you're saying is part of that is because we're having to kind of rebuild that frontal lobe up and get it to where it's able to kind of rationalize, like overrule these base brain kind of things.
Yep. So it's like excuse me. Lord. So we're essentially just having to unlearn it.
Yeah.
Right. So
but what we're unlearning a biological,
so
we're rewiring our brain.
We're rewiring. So what happens is the less that we, so now say I get that feeling of anxiety, the less I respond with, taking a drink, right? Now, all those learning networks, that association got so strong, they start to weaken. And those pathways kind of start to get weakened that way.
Now,
and at the same time, we're building up the other pathways that are more adaptive.
Now, is there a kind of general time frame for those things, or is it really like on a brain-by-brain basis?
So it's going to vary from person to person, right? There's so many factors, right? So our brains all kind of look the same on the outside if they're kind of normal, but again, hundreds of trillions of connections, the wiring can be so different, right? And so there's things sometimes people are just more genetically predisposed, right? So that means, for example, for males, in the average population, there's about a 3 to 5% chance of addiction with no family history, right? Now, for males to have a family member who's an addict, particularly a parent or even a grandparent, that jumps up to about 20 to 50%, right? Now, that doesn't mean to become an addict. That means they are primed for it if something happens. So maybe they got a lot of stress in life. Something goes on, right?
So it's kind of like a biological, because we're coming from the same DNA, and so we're using the same code to write the matter, and so to speak. I don't know if that's making sense, but that's kind of what it means by genetic. It's getting passed on.
And we could change that, right? So there's been some research that shows that even if you don't have a family history of addiction, if you develop an addiction, it's called epigenetics. It's above that genetic. It can rewrite kind of your code a bit, and you can pass that on.
Yeah.
Right. And it can work the other way too.
Yeah.
And so whenever somebody comes out of rehab, what's the kind of rule? How many? It's a number of meetings in number of days. What's that number?
90 and 90.
90, right? Why is it 90?
I don't know.
Right? Because on average, that's about how long it takes to form a new habit. All right? And to break an old one, right? So there's this cool story about.
So is that saying on average that's the time it's taking for a brain to begin to rewire, or
to start to break that association, to break that old learning, to unlearn that.
Yeah.
While at the same time reinforcing that new learning.
Yeah.
Right.
I see. For me, it's very helpful, like, to kind of root it to this biological thing, right? Because it takes the morality and the shame and the guilt and all of that out of it. It's like, dude, you're just give your brain time to reprogram and rewire, right?
Yeah. And dude, I love that you said that. So that's one of the reasons why I love doing this is, when we look at the different models of addiction, right? We're talking about AA, great program, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't always work for everybody. For those that does. But when AA was started, it was 1935, something like that.
Early.
Right. And it was based more on that moral principle. Yeah. Right. And so it was a time when addiction was looked at more like a characterological flaw.
Well, I mean, actually, like when AA came out and they called it an allergy, that was pretty profound for the time. Yeah. Because now we look back and we go, we see like there's some morality in it.
Hindsight's 2020,
but
right?
for the time being, for them to come out and say we're having an allergy to alcohol, that really destigmatized and took a lot of the morality out of it. For the time in which it came out.
I mean, think about we're coming out of prohibition phases.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there was a huge. I mean, it was a yeah.
Yeah.
And so I don't even know how we got there, man.
Yeah. But I think like what you're saying is kind of like the
yeah.
morality of some
And so
structures.
as we've learned more throughout time and as models changed, to be able to say like, hey, you know what, take the onus off the person, right? We're so easy to say, oh, they just have no willpower, right? They choose that. Why do you keep choosing that over us,
Right.
right? As if they are willing to do it. And that's why you hear so many people who are in the throes of addiction say like, I don't even like it anymore. Like, I don't even want to do it, but I just can't stop,
Yeah.
right? It's because that willpower, that thinking part of the brain is being it's taking such a beating, right? It's like it's been put in a closet and it's been malnourished, right? While there's more primal things like pleasure seeking, it's just been like roaring it up, man.
Yeah.
Right? And just
Right.
overpowering it, right?
Yeah.
And so when we can say, hey, you know what? I know, right, that your loved one is causing you so much stress. And they've caused you financial hardship. And they've caused strains in relationships and marriages and disappointment in your children or just whatever it is. They've missed work, they've lost jobs, all this stuff, right? And it's frustrating because it impacts you,
Yeah.
right? And that's valid. You should feel that way. All we're saying is let's see who we are attributing those things to. Are we mad and upset at the person? And instead, let's take it off the person, move more to the addiction. Let's move to the disease.
Right. To the biology. Of
Yeah,
it.
because what's happening is it may have started off as a choice at some point, right? But who hasn't had a drink in their life?
Right.
Who hasn't smoked a cigarette in their life?
Right.
Who hasn't had some bud in their life?
Right.
Right? Now, for some people, that's fine. They'll stop.
Who hasn't boofed cocaine?
Yeah, exactly.
You know?
Right? A key in the bathroom, right?
Who hasn't smoked a little crack at the Dairy Queen?
Yeah, or behind, the
Yeah.
Walmart or something, and it,
Yeah.
yeah, who has, So, but some people, that stuff's there.
It doesn't even. Yeah.
Yeah, because just genetically they're not predisposed, they're fine.
Right.
But we don't know that.
But also, like I guess you would also have to consider factors like environment, right? Like I guess we're talking about nature and nurture, right? Like, but sometimes those environments, those nurture environments that can be poor or violent or abusive, they're also kind of a result of some sort of biological.
Absolutely, man.
Right. So I think we talked about this, and I'm not sure if we did it on the podcast or when we did the interview for the movie Everything is Fine, available now on most high media.
Great flick.
But we talked about there's this book a friend recommended I read called The Biology of Desire. And he's a neuroscientist. I don't know if that's like above you or right next to you.
Kind of similar
Yeah.
vein of disciplines.
Yeah. But he asserted that that addiction wasn't a disease because he was saying the brain isn't malfunctioning. Like it is the brain. The brain is like what you said earlier, like it's learning, right? And it's just trying to get us to where we want to go.
Yep.
And so if where we want to go is in the Dairy Queen bathroom to smoke crack,
It's doing its job.
the brain is just going to try to get us to that point as quickly as possible. So this was his, and I don't know if it's just semantics, but he was basically saying like it's not a disease, it's not a malfunction of the brain, it's actually a feature. And so if you change your desires, your brain will ultimately will rewire to get you to where you want to go.
Yeah, I could kind of see that. It is a bit. I feel like kind of getting into semantics or just word choice with. But my definition of dysfunction is that you have something that's supposed to function one way and it's functioning against you, right? And so he's right. That's right. In that when we learn to associate things, right? For example, when we have an unanticipated source of pleasure, right? So say we go out and when we're younger, we're single, right?
Yes.
Right? And we weren't even going out trying to do it. We just going in to have some drinks, and we end up spending the night with a
Hooking up.
Yeah, hooking up without expecting it.
Yeah.
That is way more pleasure. Our
That's a
dopamine
great
gets released
night.
way.
Yes.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
gets released way more.
Yeah.
Right? It's much higher pleasure response than if we expected it.
Oh,
Right.
okay.
So biologically and from an evolutionary standpoint, that helps because the same things, those natural words, like if we found food unexpectedly, we found a source of water unexpectedly, right? We needed to have those higher pleasure relations, and we associate the memory that we could remember where it was to survive. We got to get back there,
Yeah.
right? So in that sense, it is functioning the way it's supposed to, and it's giving us the things we think we need.
Yeah.
So now, whenever we pass by that convenience store, it's like, oh man, that's where so and so was, and I bet they're still there,
Yeah.
right?
Right, you go back to the club the next Saturday,
Yep.
the same thing don't happen, and you're immensely disappointed because
Yep.
you're like, dude, what the heck?
But our brain is doing what it's supposed to do.
Yeah,
It's learned to find what it thinks we need,
yeah,
right? But when it's doing it functionally, it's for survival, right? Or it's for the benefit of ourselves or society.
Yeah.
When it's doing it dysfunctionally, it's to our detriment, it's to our destruction.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
Um,
Yeah. Because, and I guess I see what you're saying. Like because when we've kind of conditioned it in this way, then the behavior is harmful.
hmm
And so, because the result of this process is a harmful behavior to ourselves or others, that's what makes it a disease.
Yeah, that's what I think makes it dysfunction if we want to go
A
with
dysfunction.
that. Yeah. Now, I would say it's a disease process because of what happens at the neurological, the biochemistry of it, right? So, for example,
Right, because you're talking about neurons, which is
yeah,
the
at
electrical
cellular
part,
level. Yeah,
and cellular level.
yeah.
And you're not even talking about the chemical portion of it.
So it's kind of super. So like the neurons, right? So let's say we have neurons. There's neurons that release dopamine, right? And they start again at that kind of similar area up here in the pons. It's the brainstem. This goes into your spine, by the way. This kind of goes into your spinal cord down the base of your skull. It's your pons, and up here we have an area that's the VTA we talked about, right?
Yeah.
It kind of anticipates those cues, right? And we start to get excited about it,
Yeah.
right? And then we have the substantia nigra, which it stands for black substance, right? Because it kind of looks black in our brain. That's where we create the dopamine, and that sends it to the frontal parts of our brain, that reward system, right? Now, here's why I think it's a disease at that level. When we're functioning normally, right, natural rewards, right, satisfy us,
Yeah.
right? Now, what happens when we start using substances is we start to overload those neurons. There's two things that has to happen. There's a neuron that releases dopamine, and then there's another neuron that catches it.
Yeah.
I think the example I've used before here is it's like a pitcher and a catcher,
Right.
right? You got somebody throwing the ball and you got somebody catching the ball. So if you had 100 pitchers, right, and 100 catchers, normal brain, right?
Yeah.
100 pitchers throw it, right? 100 catchers catch it,
right.
right? Normal dopamine. What happens with addiction is we start throwing too many balls, and now our receptors, they catch those balls, and we have less catchers, right?
Yeah.
And not only that, then we start to get less pitchers, right? Because we're introducing so much of that dopamine,
Yeah.
right? That it's starting to overload. It's overworking those neurons,
Yeah.
and they just kind of check out like, I'm gone, homie. Like, they're
Now,
not paying me enough for this.
can those receptors, do they repair, or do you create new ones, or
So, when you're
because you're saying basically like because it's almost like I've heard like someone was like don't use like ecstasy. They would say it blows out your dopamine.
yeah,
Right.
like
So-
the up, down regulation, up regulation, all that, right?
Yeah.
So when we are in the midst of chronic substance abuse, it's not. So there's a thing called neurogenesis, and again, neuro just means neuron brain. Genesis means the beginning of creation, something like that. Book of
Yeah.
Genesis,
Yeah.
right? It happens in certain areas of brain, like the hippocampus, which is our memory, to make new memories, and our frontal lobes. That doesn't happen when we're using, right? So not only are we killing those brain cells,
But we're prohibiting the regrowth of new ones.
yes, right? So now after we've been, and it depends on how long you've been using too, right? So there's some people who've had chronic use, and after they've had a period of sobriety, right, you might see some of that return. But it's very unlikely they're going to be back to normal, right?
Yeah.
So here's what I want to say about that dopamine too is now that we have less of those dopamine being released, right? Now, the only thing that can give us more dopamine is more
Drugs, substance.
yeah. And so then that begins to form tolerance.
Because it's synthetically kind of releasing. It's kind of supercharging that release.
Yep, it's kind of like you're blowing the engine. It's like if you remember when Fast and Furious came out and everybody discovered what nozzle is, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, and you push it, at a certain time. If you ran that nozzle the whole time, you'd blow your engine up, right?
Right.
And so now we don't have as much of these neurons and dopamine produced, so we got to introduce even more from the outside world.
That's
And
why it's
when we start to
progressive.
get and then we start to get the tolerance, right? The build up. That's why people start, if you start off and, when people first start drinking, like, oh, he's a 2-drink chump, whatever,
Yeah.
right? And then all of a sudden now they're drinking 12 beers, right? Like it's no problem,
Right.
Or they took a key of Coke or a bump of Coke, right? And it was cool. Now they're taking 2-3 lines,
Right.
Or 8 ball,
Right.
whatever.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah. Like Tony Montana and that stuff,
Yeah.
because they need more, right? Because the pitchers are going away and the catchers are going away, and so they got to start. Balls have to come from somewhere,
Yeah. Right.
And so yes, after a period of sobriety, some of that can return, but depending on how long it's being used, very rarely is it going to go back to normal. Because here's the thing about the brain: there is some neurogenesis, right? But for the most part, our brain isn't able to create enough new neurons to replace a significant amount of loss.
Yeah.
Right. So, for example, I used to work with brain injury, and we'd have people who would have a stroke or they'd have a car accident, and a significant part of their brain cells would die, right? Now, there's some that would kind of heal if they weren't completely dead, but the general rule of thumb is kind of like that Justin Timberlake song, "Man, they're dead and gone," right? With T.I., by the way.
Yeah,
Don't
right.
the best part.
Fantastic rapper. Yeah.
Exactly, man, dude.
Yeah.
I don't even want to get it Urban Underground. I mean, man.
Have you been to the Trap Museum?
Oh no, I haven't. And I wanted to so bad before we moved.
Yeah.
But it's Pink House, right? The Pink Trap House.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, man, I wanted to so bad, but I don't think it's of interest to anybody else in my family. I've been doing it solo.
You could have called me, dude. I would have rolled down with you.
I didn't even think about it.
Yeah. So, T.I., Justin Timberlake, Dead and Gone, Brain Cells.
Oh, we got
Yes,
backtrack.
yeah,
So
cool.
for the most part, once our neurons die, they're gone, right? And the thing is, our brain cells are dying all the time, right? We're born with all these neurons. We have about 80 to 100 billion, and over time, our brain cells just die, right? That's why as we get older, right, 30s, 40s, 50s, we start to get a little slower.
Walk in a room and go, what
the
the hell did I
hell?
walk
Yeah.
into this room?
Exactly, right? Our reaction time slows down. That's why whenever you're behind that 70-year-old lady with the blue hair, you're kind of nervous,
Yeah.
right? Because she's going to take a little bit longer to react just naturally, right? But what happens with substance abuse is we expedite that process. No, it is.
I mean, it's amazing. I can sit here and have a conversation, with the amount of drugs. And when I started using, at like 11, 12 years old, using hard substances, like how I'm still able to function. And because it is like, I notice like people in recovery usually are pretty fun, bright, intelligent, witty. Most people are able to do things like succeed in their career or their work. Like most people in recovery, I find, have this tenacious ability to kind of do that, right? So it's amazing that they put their brains through so much damage and they still have this drive, right?
Yeah.
But there was one thing I wanted to ask, which is like, so there's that concept of it being a progressive disease, addiction. And so you'll see this as like someone will have maybe a year of clean time, sober time, and then they'll decide for whatever reason, various factors, to go back and use the substance again. And what a lot of people find is they will enter back in a more extreme version than they were when they left a year before. What's happening in the brain, why somebody would start back, not where they left off, but like really dive even further deeper into it?
It's kind of like that rebound effect, So first part of that, I think, is good to mention, is one of the biggest factors for relapse is mood.
Yeah.
Right. Now, most people, I think we talked about this before, most people associate, relapse with negative moods. And it's true. Stress is a big one, right? So whenever in recovery, I think that's why it's great to have talk therapy, right? To learn to manage that stress. It's great to have a sponsor.
And keep your life kind of simple and
keep
small.
your life simple, right?
Yeah.
Because what happens is when we get stressed, right? Again, that's a chemical reaction. It's not just abstract, I just don't think about a thing, feeling right. No. What happens is when we get stressed, there is what's called the hypopituitary adrenal axis. Fancy way of saying there's a part of our brain called a hypothalamus. Hypo means sub, and thalamus means chamber.
Okay.
It's sub because it's below our thalamus, which means chamber, right? And our hypothalamus is responsible for things, that regulate things like eating, again, drinking, sex, motivation, right? But also what happens is when we get stressed, that activates our pituitary gland, which is like our master adrenal. It releases hormones and stuff like that, right? So it activates that pituitary gland that's right below it, and then that activates our sympathetic nervous system, which is that fight or flight. And in that sense, things into our adrenal glands, which actually sit at the top of our kidneys. And then that releases about three things. One, it releases cortisol, which is that stress response. Second, it releases epinephrine, which is adrenaline. And third, it releases norepinephrine, right? Which is kind of like, it kind of like when you take ADHD medication, some of them have that, again, it gives that motivation and that kind of feel good, right? But it releases that cortisol, right? What that happens is then it starts to shut down that front part of our brain, right? When we're stressed, I mean, there's this great stat that Chris Voss talks about that I think he took for Dan Kahneman. And Chris Voss is this former FBI negotiator who is a brilliant guy. But he says, we are 31% dumber when we are in a bad mood or stressed, right?
Yeah.
Which means we're less likely to problem solve,
Yeah.
right? And we're less likely to anticipate the risk and do a risk assessment.
So that's like the case what we call the fuckets.
Yes, the fuck is exactly, man.
Yeah.
It's kind of like when Cat Williams was like, man, you're taking, it's like, man, fuck them bills.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
But so we do, right? And so since our problem solving is reduced and we're in a very stressful time, right? We fall back in what we know because we can't even think of a different way to deal with that problem.
Right. Because
That's
that
what we tend to
frontal lobe
relapse.
shutting down, and that's kind of like where you can do it's like you make a very permanent decision, right?
Mm-hmm. Because also, and then once we're under the influence, right, one of the reasons why we tend to jump right back into it harder is because those frontal lobes shut down, and what that frontal lobes are also responsible for is anticipating the future, thinking about the future, right? So one, we are less anxious, right? Test it down. Two, we're just in the moment. We're not even thinking. We don't even care about the future consequences. And three, it's been so long. It's kind of like when you tell a kid, hey, you can't have a cookie before dinner. What is on that kid's mind the whole damn time?
Cookie.
And he wants that cookie more than anything.
Right.
So when he finally gets that cookie, man, he's not just getting one.
Yeah.
Right? He's going to tear into him.
Yeah.
Right? So we've been inhibiting, right?
Well, yeah, and I guess like talking about those receptors and that dopamine, you kind of you had all these pitchers and catchers, then they dwindle, and then you're living sobriety, which is in comparison a lot less dopamine, right? And then all of a sudden you reintroduce this volume.
Yep.
And it's like, oh, I remember that. I want that. That's good.
Exactly. So remember, when do people who are addicted like opiates, like heroin, when are they most likely to overdose?
I don't know.
So it's usually when they relapse.
Okay.
Right? Because what they don't factor in is they can't tolerate as much heroin in the system as they did when they're at the peak of their addiction.
Right. Yes. I know
That
what you're
tolerance is
talking
built up, right?
about. Yeah.
So same thing here is you already have your natural dopamine is starting at circulating levels, kind of getting back to even, right? And so when you go into it, you forget that you're almost going back to like the first time you used, but you're going into it like you did when you're at your peak.
Using them the same amount. Or
Yeah.
whatever.
So you just boom, like you take a nosedive in.
Yeah.
Right? And then that sets you up for a very dangerous situation. There's all kinds of ways people die from substance use, not just overdose, but making bad decisions, if you think about drinking, when people pass out, they black out drunk, right? They're just one step away from falling asleep and they're waking up again.
Yeah.
Right? There's that buzz. There's that you start to lose some of that motor control, but your cognition's still kind of fine. Then you start to lose that cognition and thinking. You're less inhibited. You start to do and say things you normally wouldn't do or say. Then you start to black out, right? When people get blackout drunk and you're about 0.223 alcohol content, whatever. And then after the blackout, then people pass out and fall asleep, right? And that's about 0.4 or 5, and that's getting up to alcohol poisoning. And then there's a strong overlap between falling asleep and then dying, not ever waking up again.
Yeah.
All right? So
I had alcohol poisoning once
oh, bro.
in high school, drinking Bud Lights.
Damn, how many Bud Lights you drink?
It was a lot of 40s. And I tell you, I never drank another Bud Light after that because it was the worst feeling. I was laid out in my front yard puking as a teenager.
Yep.
Yeah. Never could drink Bud Light again,
Some people is for that, man. Like for me, I was, cocaine was great, weed was great. Actually, a lot of things were great.
Yeah.
But for me, it was alcohol, man.
Yeah.
Right? And for me, if I got sick or something, like I remember tequila.
Yeah.
Right? First thing I didn't drink tequila forever, but I drank everything else still.
Yeah. Right. Because you want this. Yeah. Same thing, right? I just switched to, because I'm still wanting that effect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead. What do you have? I had some stuff prepared. We dove right in with this. Has all been great.
Dude, that's my bad. I just kind of hopped in. I was,
No, it was
adrenaline pumping
perfect.
from getting in here.
I wanted to do this. So, what a neuropsychologist is.
Mm-hmm.
A neuropsychologist is a healthcare provider who has specialized knowledge of how brain conditions affect your behavior and cognitive skill, how you use your brain. This includes things like general intellect, attention, and concentration. So, what is a neuropsychological evaluation?
Nice. So, I'll tell you what, before I know I'm all over the place. ADHD is kicking in here. I'll tell you what neuropsychological evaluation, but I want to go back to the cues.
Okay.
They're part of that VTA, that ventral tegmental area that we talked about. It gets input from our our subcortical, our attention, subcortical attention measured, right? So what happens is when it gets activated, now our brain is primed to pay attention to those cues that make us feel good. Even more, right? So now we're paying attention to that. At the same time, because those frontal lobes have been exhausted or not working as function as much, our frontal lobes are things that put the brakes on stuff. It's not able to inhibit us from pursuing those as much. So that's where you get into that seeking behavior, right? You get the craving, and then all you can focus on is getting the next fix to the detriment of anything else. Oh, you got your kids' recital? Yeah. Hey, have you seen Tony? I got reaching your plug, right?
Right.
So just another thing that destigmatizes. It's like it's not necessarily a willful like choosing the drug over your kid's recital. It's hey, your brain is not even allowing you to make that choice.
Right.
Now, going back to neuropsychological evaluation. So what we do is whenever somebody has a concern about there being a change in either their behavior, their personality, or their thinking abilities, right? That's a significant change that's either happened over time or subtly that their physicians, neurologists, whoever it is, can't attribute to, they're having trouble figuring out why. It's not to mood or whatever. They get sent to us and say, hey, what's going on? Something seems like it's off their brain. Maybe there's findings on MRI imaging or CT scan, or maybe there's not. But they're like, this doesn't seem like it's just something normal mood. Can you figure out what's going on? Right. So they come see me, and what I'll do is it's a few parts. There's one thing I'll do is what I call a diagnostic interview, or not what we call. And that's where I sit there for about an hour and ask you 100,000 questions, right? But what I have to do is I have to establish not just who you are in the moment and the problems you're having with now. I need to know your history. I need to know things, all the different variables that might be impacting how you function normally and what's changed.
Right.
So, for example, I'll ask about educational history. What I want to know is, hey, and sometimes people, I'm not trying to say like, hey, were you dummy in school or anything like that? But hey, did you have trouble learning to read? Did your teacher say you had trouble sitting still? Man, when you went home and came back to school, when you came home, was it a common occurrence for your mom to be like, where are your books? I don't know. Was your backpack a mess? Right?
Yeah.
I'm trying to see, are there any disorders that were occurring in the brain that you were born with or developed before then?
And so this is all happening via a series of questions. So there's no scanning or...
So that's the first part. So I don't do the scans. So the way I kind of describe it is when you go do scans, MRI, PET scan, CT scan, right? You're getting a picture of the brain.
Yeah.
In different ways. You might be able to see what parts of the brain aren't metabolizing as quickly as they need to, so breaking down things, or if there's a structural part, so is there damage to the part of the brain, right? Or is there a part that's not as big as it should be or small as it should be in MRIs, right? Or is there a bleed, right? So that my analogy is, and I stole it from a mentor of mine, a former group practice partner, John Sass. So Dr. Sass, if you ever see this, I'm stealing your stuff, man. But it's like imaging is like if you had something going wrong with your car and you took your car to the mechanic, to the shop, and they pop the hood and they open it up and they're looking around your engine and they see, hey man, there's some smoke coming off the engine, right? So like now, why is there smoke there, right? Why are you having this problem? It could be a myriad of issues. It could be a lot of issues, right? It could be there's a leak, something that's getting onto the engine burning off. You could have, cracked a head. It's all your radiator and your system isn't working like it's supposed to. It's overheating, all kinds of things, right? So that's getting the picture. What's going on? What can we see?
Yeah.
But then to really get an idea, you got to take the car for a test drive, right? But before to find out what's wrong, and then after to make sure it's fixed.
Yeah.
So when people come see me, I take their brain for a test drive.
That's it. Okay.
So I ask all those questions, but then what I do is I take them through a series of measures, assessment, tests, problem, whatever you want to call them. But all these tests are meant to test different parts of the brain, right? So for example, I'm going to look at how's your memory working. You say you're having trouble remembering things, right? So let's take a look at your memory systems.
Okay.
All right, so I want to see how well you remember different things. How well do you remember things that you hear, right? Your auditory, your verbal memory, things people tell you, stories. Hey, can you get this and this from the grocery store? You're supposed to take this many milligrams of your medication at this time at night. You think about school, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? You got to remember all that stuff, right? Now that's, for most people, that happens in the left side of the brain.
Okay.
Right? So I tell people L for left, L for language. But I also want to see how your visual spatial memory is working. And that's, visual spatial is a fancy way of saying how well do you remember things that you see, but not only what they look like, but where they are in relation to other things.
Right.
So if you come out of
which I think is more like if you ask me of a memory, the first thing I'm going to do is visualize it before I even do anything else. I have to see it, and then I can see it, and then I can describe what I see.
Exactly.
Right.
So that's where your brain works together. So now you conjured up that visual image, which is on your right, and then that left comes in and starts to describe it, right?
Yeah.
So I'll say, hey, so a good example of your spatial memory is you're in school and you have to remember where things are on a map, geography, right? Or you're at a new city and you're trying to remember how to get around places. You walk into a mall and you're coming out, hey, what store do we come into? How do we get back there? Where do we park the car?
You are here.
Yeah.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
I want to look at things like language. I want to look at things like attention, concentration.
Yeah.
How well you pay attention to things, right? I want to look at how you're problem solving. The reason why I'm looking at all these different areas is because they all work together. So if somebody says they're having trouble with memory, right? Your memory system could be fine, but the supporting cast isn't doing their job. So memory is a very high up thing.
And you can tell this through a series of questions.
No, not just the questions. That's me getting a history to narrow things down, figure out where I need to go. But it's the test I'm giving them, right? So for example, let's say with memory, this is very basic, but there's about 3 or 4 things that need to happen for your memory to work. The first thing is, are your senses fine, right? You wear glasses, right? If you didn't wear your glasses, right, and you try to remember what you saw, your brain's going to have a distorted memory of what it was because it wasn't accurate.
Yeah.
Can you hear me, right? Can you feel things where you're supposed to, right?
Yeah.
Your smell, your taste, all those go to memory, right? So your senses have to be working because our brain relies on our senses to get data from the outside world around us.
Yeah.
And it's having to process millions of pieces of data every second.
Yeah.
And so when that comes in through our various senses, then it goes to our front lobes that has to be able to determine what's important to pay attention to. I can't pay attention to everything, right?
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right?
It's
So
wild.
right now it's like, hey, I need to be paying attention to Christian, right?
Right.
But when I'm paying attention to you, I
Not
have
to whoever keeps walking
I
in
know.
and out of here and sitting down and going up. Yeah.
yeah.
Right.
But
But
I don't
my
even,
brain is pulling that information in.
yeah, it's pulling it all in, right? But then there's selective attention. You're selecting what to attend to. But distraction occurs when something like that does happen.
Right.
And then there's a part of your brain that almost gets distracted. For some people, they can bring it right back. Other people, like with ADHD, they're gone, right? And they're not. It's like it's hard getting them back.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
So our brain has to decide what's important to pay attention to, right? What's relevant, and then once it decides that, right, senses, then it has to get into our brain, what's called encoding. It has to get into our brain and get to a point where we just keep it in our short term for a couple of seconds.
Oh, wait, close that camera, Leslie. Can you close that lens because it'll keep the battery? Close that the window, yeah, because otherwise the battery will go out dead. Sorry.
So the information comes into our short-term memory, working memory. It's called working memory because we hold on to it for about 30 seconds or so to work with that information, just long enough till we need it, right? We're not going to remember it forever, but we need it. Somebody's giving us a phone number, and you remember it to write it down. You've asked me a question. I need to be able to hold on to that question in my memory long enough to not think about a previous response, bring up those memories. I need to answer it, anticipate what the next question might be, remember what I've already said, put together, right?
But now, like
What's that?
short-term memory is selective too because I can remember, like if we have a conversation, I can remember the conversation and the connection, but I might forget someone's name.
Yeah.
Right. Or if someone says, "Here's my number, 85 whatever," I go, "Okay," and then it's gone. It didn't even store.
Didn't even register.
But I can. But other things, I can pick up on. Like I will pick up on parts of your story or something you said about yourself or where you grew up, and that just gets wrote right away.
Yeah.
But the name won't get wrote.
It's because we remember things that are more meaningful to us, right? So our brain will remember things that are more meaningful to us. So if it's something that's more kind of mundane or basic, it's not very important to us, we're less likely to remember it because our brain is thinking, that's not a priority.
Yeah.
So we remember things more meaningful, and we remember things that have more of a context, like a story. So people tend to remember a story better than just a list of facts,
Yeah.
right? Because there's association, there's a gist to it, right?
Ah.
So that's kind of what one of those things is.
Yeah.
So we hold it into short term, and now once it's in short term memory, then our brain has to decide what is it that we need to remember for long term, like you're talking about. Do I need to remember their name? Maybe not. The number? But that story they told me, that's important. Now let's move that from short term into long term memory.
So I'm going to ask you a question that's going to throw us off. Who is the one assigning the value?
You are.
So who am I if I'm my brain?
It's a good question. So that's now we're talking about brain and mind,
Yeah.
right?
Which is somewhere we got a little bit to it when we were doing the interview for the documentary.
Yeah.
But we were already like 2 hours into the interview, and I think we just kind of.
Put it off.
But that's like because when I work with people, one of the first things we do in a session, in a group session, is I try to establish that you are not your thoughts and you are not your mind. You are the entity that has thoughts. You are the thing that has emotions. Your thoughts and emotions are valuable, but they're not you. And for some people, that's really hard to even consider.
To separate.
Yeah. So because we're talking about this, like the brain and that biological component, but there seems to be another thing that's assigning these values. So what would you say, like talking about it like from a biological standpoint, where would you say that thing exists biologically in the brain?
Oh man, it's going to depend, right? So it's also going to depend, a lot of it depends on the environment, the setting, right? So are there certain things, environment, setting, that you be paying more attention to so that you can remember, right? So for example, growing up, you know, if you were in a certain part of a neighborhood, whatever, that you knew, man, might be a bit hostile, right? There's certain things about that you remember more and pay attention to more.
Yeah.
So that dictates what's important, right?
Yeah. So is then that you? I would maybe whatever word we say the observer. That observer is that observer just a collection of all past experiences?
Right? So it's memory, right? So we come up. Why do we know we need to be more observant during that time? Because we've had experience in the past either personally or because we've heard enough about it.
Yeah.
So again, it comes down to a problem like survival, man. Our brains are wired for self-preservation, survival.
So I'm choosing what I'm going to pick into, what I'm going to remember, what I'm going to put into long-term memory,
based on what is important for,
which would be the culmination of all my life experiences, is going to kind of dictate what I would say this is important.
Yep. So it could be a culmination of experiences, or it could be something more immediate. So for example, remember when we were in school, and I mean, not like you, but if you're sitting there and you're trying to remember what you need to remember for a test. Your teacher, your professor, whatever, may be giving the lecture, right? But then they go off on a tangent on some other story. So you have to decide which one's more important to remember, right? I need to remember this content that's going to be on that test. So some of it is dictated by the needs of the moment, right? And the future needs, right, of what you remember. I may not remember the doctor's name or the nurse or anything else, very much will too, but I might remember, hey, you got to take this medication, this milligrams at this time, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of a mixture of our past experiences. It kind of drive us to things we need to pay attention to, and that might be wrong. Like you're saying, your thoughts and your emotions, right? Thoughts and emotions, I'm glad you said they're valid, but they're not always right.
Yeah.
Right? And so that's where it's hard to get people to separate is you've had these thoughts that led to these emotions for a reason. Right? So you look at like trauma victims, right? People who had some kind of trauma growing up as a child or through PTSD, through war or whatever, abuse, whatever, right? They've had certain thoughts to help them survive in that moment. Right? Those thoughts might have been, hey, make yourself as scarce as possible. Because if I'm not noticed, I'm less likely for them to then to be abused or whatever. Right? Or what can I do so that they don't be, how can I do things and that's over to the...
So it's like a conditioned behavior.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, as they get older, those thoughts and those emotions might have been protective then, but now they're in a different situation, their brain is so programmed to doing it, now it's not helping them any.
Right.
Yeah. And so that might dictate. So again, your thoughts and emotions are valid, but now they might not be accurate for the situation.
Well, I mean, that's what I'm doing now when sitting with a sponsor is we're going to these childhood instances and realizing, okay, so these things that that happened when I was a child created a filter or a program,
A way to see the world,
a way to see it, but they're subconscious almost. I'm not aware that I'm doing it. Right. And so then it's in talking about it and kind of opening it back up and unraveling it and then saying, here's the old story, and then let's assign a new story to it.
Exactly. Let's relearn.
We're relearning what that is. So when those events happen, rather than it processing through this old conditioned response, I'm giving a new response to the thing, which...
Some people call it a corrective experience, right? It's an experience. Now let's have a corrective experience. This is more of a accurate, correct way to respond to whatever it is.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
And so you're right. So it happens. Some people also call those thoughts that happen. They call them automatic thoughts because they happen so automatically we're not even aware of them. It's like reflex. When I talk to like athletes or kids, whatever, or outside of a clinical setting, I almost call them like thought ninjas. Right.
Yeah.
So ninjas, their main thing is operate in the dark, not be seen, not be heard, but then do their job. So thought ninjas are these thoughts we have that are bad for us. They come in, wreak havoc. We only see them, then they're gone. And then we're left with those thoughts to clean up the mess.
Right.
So we got to bring light to those thought ninjas, man. Pull them out to the light.
Yeah.
right?
I
And
like
then now
that,
when
the
we have
thought
them, we can
ninja
question
just
them.
jumping around
Yeah,
in
bro.
your brain in
Dude,
the
they're throwing
dark.
Chinese stars and like,
Yeah.
you don't even know where they're coming from. And since we don't know, then we might associate them to people around us,
Right.
right? And now because we're
Now,
not
like that's something that has been like a consistent thing for me, right? It's like, and I've always just kind of attributed it to, well, I'm a creative, right? And so I know other creatives who have kind of like a hyperactive brain,
Yeah.
a brain that's called. I think there's another battery back here if you need another battery. But like I find that most creatives have kind of like this hyperactive brain that's always thinking and processing. Because, like, if you want to have something solved, go to a creative, right? Because a creative can look at it, see it from a different angle, and go, "Oh, here's the solution," right? And make you think about it in a new way. But the problem with that creative mind is, it's always doing that,
yeah.
even when I'm not asking it to. You know, it's like there's really no problem, but my mind is wanting to. It's kind of like this. It's like the gift and the curse of it, right?
Yeah, double-edged sword.
Yeah. So is that what's so in that situation where the mind is active, overactive? Where is that happening in the brain, and how would you correct that? Correct that, like without medicine.
Yeah. So there's a couple things. I mean, there's everything from about feedback to talk therapy and everything else. But I think to understand it from a brain standpoint, right, is there's actually some cool research. And, I'm going to keep this apolitical,
Okay.
right? But when we look at research, we could look at differences in brain structures from people who are more conservative and more liberal, right?
Okay.
And tend to lean and vote that way in their behaviors,
Yeah.
right? So we'll start with people who tend to be more conservative.
How do we find this out? We're cutting their head open at the end of the life.
Yeah, we don't. Yeah, no. What we're doing is where scanning comes in, right? And so we could look at different parts of the brain that might be bigger for a certain
Really?
group of people, or if we look at like PET scans, parts of the brain are more active, or fMRIs, you see those parts of the brain more active when they're doing a certain thing or thinking about a certain thing
Wow.
than other people. So, for example, there was this a classic study for kids, and the study was you would ask the kid, you'd ask, hey, you know what? You could either have one marshmallow now, or if you wait 15 minutes, you can have 2 marshmallows, right? And there's a study on delayed gratification, which people with that addiction we have trouble with,
Yeah.
right? We're going to take that first marshmallow, but then
Yeah.
we're going to weasel away,
Yeah.
But what they saw is that the children who are able to wait for that 15 minutes to get that second marshmallow, right, versus the children who took that first marshmallow, the ones who took that first marshmallow, there was much less activity in the frontal lobes. They weren't working as well to inhibit them and think about the reward and do that later, right? So now we look at people like this conservative and liberal, right? So people who tend to be more conservative, there's a part of our brain called their amygdala, which stands for, they call it amygdala because it looks like an almond. And that's what it stands for. And it's right in front of your memory centers. If I have it. Yeah. So this is like the middle of your brain, right? This is your hippocampus. This is your amygdala, right? Now, this part right here, it does a few things. One of the things it does is it associates emotions to memories, right? And it's also the thing that lights up whenever we're going to the fight or flight. There's a strong emotion. Right?
Okay.
So there's actually I don't even know which way I want to go. There's so many cool things I want to say about it. I don't know where I was. Let's go back. This is my brain all over the place.
So
Oh,
conservative
the amygdala. Yeah.
people having an more active amygdala.
Yeah. So one thing you'll see with people who are conservative is their amygdala tends to be bigger than people's who are more liberal.
Physically bigger.
It's more active. So the amygdala, one of the things it does is it attaches fear or worry and insecurity to memories and those kind of things. So people who are conservative, they tend to like things that are more stable. They don't like a lot of change. They think more traditional because they can anticipate it, right? They don't want that worry of the unknown, right?
Now, is this because why? How did it get that way, right?
So that's the chicken or the egg. Now, are they born this way, or is it because they grew up in a family and that's just kind of what it was instilled in? So that anytime when our brain is active, the more parts that we use. So you're creative, right? So when we look at artists or we look at like cab drivers, there's a part of our brain that cab drivers is way better developed than people who aren't cab drivers, and it's their parts that help them with visual spatial stuff, right? Because they have to learn their way around cities all the time.
Yeah.
Right. Musicians, right? So a piano player, the parts that frontal cortex talking about for motor movement, much more developed in the hand areas and stuff, right?
Yeah.
Now, were they born that way, or did it happen? And it's
Or
kinda
did they
nature nurture.
cultivate it? Or
Yeah.
but then there are those people who are like talented.
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
you
And it's just natural to brain that part of the brain.
they still got to practice.
Yes.
But they're starting ahead of everyone else.
Yep. Now their aptitude, their ceiling is way higher.
Yeah.
Right.
Now,
So,
for what's in the brain for like a liberal,
Good.
politically liberal person?
so for a little person, their amygdala is not as big, but there's a part of the brain called anterior cingulate cortex, which is called ACC, and it sits right up in the frontal lobe. This is like the middle. So if I'm sitting here and you cut my head down this way,
Okay.
and move it this way,
With a saw or a sword or something?
I prefer a sword, man. Like at least
Okay,
give me
sword.
like a katana. It's just a quick.
Quick.
slice.
Okay.
So this is your corpus callosum right here. Up here is your anterior cingulate cortex, ACC. That part of the brain, it tends to be more developed, and that's the part of our brain that tends to like to try new things, that are open to change. Right? You get more pleasure and you get more excitement from change. Those kind of things. If you have to sit there and do the same old stable and it irritates the piss out of you, right?
Yeah.
So they tend to be more open to change, right? And so when you look at that, we could predict about anywhere from 88 to 93% accuracy if somebody goes liberal conservative just looking at the image in there,
Wow.
right? So here's the thing to kind of communicate, right? So I think in our country, so much division is we are all trying to communicate with the other side the way we would want to be communicated with and the things that make sense to us.
Yeah.
So I tend to fare more liberal. I part of the things that ADC, like I said, the creatives, we see a lot of things. So I like newness, right? I like change. I like facts. I like learning new things.
Yeah.
Right? I don't like to stay the
Which
same.
is why I'm like, hey, do you want to do a show tomorrow? Drive 3 hours, and you're like,
yeah.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
of course I do.
Yeah.
Get me out of here,
Dude, exactly,
Yeah,
yes.
something new.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And I love,
yeah.
Now, so we do that,
Yeah.
right? We go that way. Now, for people who are more conservative, facts don't really matter. They don't care. They want that stability and tradition, right? So what happens is liberals will try to talk to conservatives and give them facts and how this could work and everything else. But all this happening, conservative here, that's that amygdala is lighting up, and it's that fear response of, hey, warning,
Right.
something's not right here, you're in danger.
Yeah,
Right.
it's interpreting unknown as danger, which is
Yeah. And so they want to keep it the same. Now, when a conservative tries to communicate with the liberal, they're doing that. They want traditional stability, this is why and everything. But the liberal, all they're doing is their AC isn't getting activated, right? It's not going to drive any behavior. So that's why if you switch it and say, hey, you know what? If you want to talk to conservative, or somebody's conservative, or not even conservative, since your own life, your employee or an athlete or your kid, right, who likes things more they're regimented, right? First, you lead with how things are going to stay the same, right?
yeah,
So let's say we'll take same-sex marriage. That tends to be a big one right here.
Right.
Say, you know what? What's important to people who have the amygdala response conservatives? They like cohesiveness. They like one person, one-on-one. They like that's going to be stable. They like that, right? They like right. So you say, hey, you know what? Here's what's going to stay the same. Two people who loving each other traditionally, committing to each other, all those kind of things.
yeah,
Right.
right.
Now, if you're talking to a liberal, they don't want to hear that. What they want to hear is the facts. So you start with the facts, right? And you lead that way. So now
Wow.
you're taking their off their defense,
Oh, dude, yeah.
right? And so when you get them off their defense, because we are no creatures.
We need two different politicians or politically minded people sitting on each chair, and then you just in the middle going, now let me
Yeah.
tell you what your brain's doing right now. Yeah. To
Yeah.
take the personality and the morality and all those things out of it to
Yep.
say, here's where your biology is differing,
Yep.
and here's how we can translate it.
Yeah.
Fascinating.
And because you don't know that's happening, you're just assigning all those uncomfortable feelings to the other person.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
And the last thing I'll say about that is, we are no creatures, which means our initial instinct is no. We feel comfort by no.
Yeah.
Right. So if I came in and I said, hey, Christian, do you have a few minutes to talk? Right.
Yeah.
Or a collector, somebody on a phone calls, hey, Mr. Jansen, you have a few minutes to talk. What's your initial response?
I
You
got
may not
one.
say- Yeah.
I got one.
Right. No.
Get
Now-
to it.
Yeah. Now, if I change that question, I said, hey, is this a bad time to talk?
Right.
You would say no.
Nah.
Now that that no is out of the way, right?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That's the first one. Now we're
Sales
more open.
tactics, right. Yeah, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's like, now it's like, okay,
Yeah.
right? So it's about the communication.
Yeah. All right. So I have a couple questions I want to make sure we get to, and then we'll wrap up.
And I know I didn't even answer the evaluation thing, but that's
No,
fine.
you did. You did. So I did do a brain scan with an addictionologist.
Nice.
They put these little electrodes and this little gel on there and put it on there, and then they scanned my brain, eyes open, and then scanned it, eyes closed, and then they showed me the scan. And I think what it was measuring was probably electrical activity, right? And so the psychiatrist who did that, she's a addictionologist, she said, based on your scan, when you need to make an important decision, she said, close your eyes. Because there was some like theta and beta waves, and but basically I could see the scan with my eyes open was these red things that were popping out, right?
Yeah.
But when my eyes closed, those red things were much lower, and then there was this blue and green color, I guess. What she was saying is that when I'm closing my eyes, I guess I'm other parts of my brain are active, and so I'll be able to make a decision better.
Yeah. It's kind of like you're shutting off those more impulsive parts, right?
Yeah.
And allowing those more kind of the ability to like think about things slower.
Yeah.
Shanti, right? And
Yeah.
so it sounds like
It was a fascinating experience. Like
Oh.
I really think I always wished I had done it earlier, and every time the thing is like addictionologists get private pay.
Oh, yeah.
Right. So it's
Yeah,
hard to
that's-
get people to
right, and
them.
it's expensive.
Yeah. She's like, it's expensive. But it told me a lot. Like I learned so much
Yeah.
about that process because I learned how my brain was. She could see from that brain scan where I had a brain injury, where it got bumped in the head.
Were the waves slower there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. She could say, I see you got a head injury here. And I said, I did. I fell off my bike and I hit my head when I was a kid.
Yeah.
And so there was some damage. She could see that from the brain scan.
Yeah.
And then what they're doing is I guess they take, they'll take my age, and then there's, however many other thousands of brain scans of men
Normals, yeah.
my age, and then that's how they kind of go normal. Or you ever see The Bride of Frankenstein?
Which one? The old one with Gene Wilder?
Yeah.
Yeah.
When he goes in there and they're like, "Give me a normal brain," and he brings in the brain, and the monster comes alive. He goes, "What brain did you get?" He goes, "I got Abby normal." Abnormal. You got it if you haven't seen
I forgot about
The
that.
Bride of Frankenstein. Or is it Young Frankenstein is what it is.
Oh, Young Frankenstein. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh man.
But
All
it is,
right.
and that's kind of, dude, and that's kind of ties into that's called a
Put
normative
the
sample.
candle down.
So, like, it's a normative sample. It's like when I do my evaluations, right? When I'm looking at the changes in behavior, personality, thinking, remember all that? What I do is the same thing as I say, hey, you know what? I'm gonna take your scores, your raw scores, and everything, and I'm gonna compare you to people who tens of thousands of people across the nation, right? Who are in your same age range, same level of education, right? Did you graduate 10th grade, 9th grade? Do you have 20 years? Are you a doctor? Are you a lawyer? Whatever, right? Ethnicity, males versus females. Some things right-handed versus left-handed, because that can change things. Sometimes level part of the country you grew up in, right? So all these different factors. But I compare you to tens of thousands of people who have no known neurological problems, kind of quote-unquote normal brain functioning. And based on that, I can say, hey, you're right where you should be in these areas, right? You're shining in these areas because we all have strengths and weaknesses, or there's some areas that are low, which could be normal, but there's areas that are so low that they're abnormal. They're beyond what we would be considered normal and are likely due to diagnosis X, Y, or Z based on that pattern.
Some sort of.
So course-cause dementia it occurs when people have chronic alcohol use over years of time. What happens is the alcohol impacts their liver because your liver has to process like 90% of that, right? And because of that, your body is unable to produce this thing called thiamine that your brain needs to function well, vitamin B12, thiamine, all that. Now, because of that lack, that deficiency, your brain gets malnourished. And there's part of your brain called the mammillary bodies, these two little balls that right by your memory centers. I have them on here. I don't even know if I don't think they're on here. Anyways, they kind of sit up here. The mammillary bodies, those shrink. And when those shrink up, because that deficiency, it impacts your memory. So you almost get amnestic. So these people come in and they have trouble remembering new memories. So you tell them something 5 or 10, 15 minutes later, they may not even remember it.
Wow.
The problem with that also is they're in denial, not a psychological denial, but a neurological denial because they're not even aware of the problem. So if you ask them about memory problems, like, no, I need to start drinking. I don't have problems.
Right.
So again, it goes back to, then I'll look at that and it's like, hey, you know what? Compared to your peers, bro, like you're 55, but your memory is exhibiting at the same level as somebody who's 85 in severe stages of Alzheimer's,
Wow.
right? Shouldn't be that bad for your age.
Yeah.
Right? So like the brain scout love that, what she brought out the waves is now it brings something that's very abstract that people don't really think about. It's hard to understand, right? It brings it to something that's more concrete.
Yeah.
You can see. And as humans, the more concrete and simpler things are, when we get it out of that abstract unknown and bring it out into the world in front of us, it's more tangential. We can put our hands on it.
Mm-hmm.
One, we understand it better. It becomes more real.
Yeah.
And two, it also takes that stigma off of it,
Yeah.
right?
The shame and the guilt and the why am I this way?
Yeah.
And it kind of like puts it into more concrete.
And you show it to families.
Yeah.
Hey, this is why,
Yeah.
right? So then it's, again, we need to direct that negative emotion we have.
Right.
It's valid, but are we directing it at the right thing?
Yeah. And don't use it as an excuse to leave the house at 3 a.m.
No. And that's the
You
difference
saw
between...
my brain scan, babe.
Yeah.
I got to go. I got to do it.
Absolutely. And a therapist told me this, and I told my son, because he has ADHD, he was like, it's not your fault, but now that you know about it, it is your responsibility,
Right.
right? Now, how do we help you to be responsible over it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this comes from another doctor, different kind of doctor. He's a psychological doctor. And this was his question. And he's obviously a college level person because you'll hear it in these words. In regards to the exponential growth curve of technological advancement,
Exponential. We have trouble.
what are you most excited about in terms of biotechnology and nanotechnology and how they may shape cognitive neuroscience in the future of neuropsychology as a whole?
First off, yeah,
Dr. West, thank you for that question.
Dr. West, come on, homie, really? No, beautiful question. First off, I would say I'm probably equal parts excited and scared,
Oh,
right? I'm scared about the advances and how much, we kind of play with that. And it's kind of like the Isaac Asimov, iRobot stuff, AI and all that. I think there's a lot to go on there, but I'm excited by how much it can help us understand, right? Cognition, the human brain from a neuropsychological standpoint. Actually, in my field right now, there's a big push to move more of a computer-based assessments, right? And a lot of that push is coming from us, the younger generation, and there's some pushback, from our generation. And, so I'm kind of the mindset of, hey, you know what, it's going to happen. So as neuropsychologists, we need to be on board, make sure it's happening correctly.
right.
Right? So when we talk about biotechnology, one of the things I'm kind of excited about.
So what is biotechnology, though?
So biotechnology is anything that interfaces when you bring together technology. So anything that's we think about computer-based, microchip, all that processing.
This is the microchip in your head kind of interfacing with your neurons.
Yep,
or
and we
whatever.
mesh it. Bio is just a fancy way of saying life, right? So biology is the study of life,
Yeah.
right? So anything that we interface that now, and we move it, and we merge the two, right? Humans and technology,
Okay.
right? And technology can also be medical technology, right? So one of the things I am excited about, there's so much, but I'll tell you two things right now. I might have a couple. So one of the technologies we have is when I was at this place called Shepherd Center here in town, sometimes we'd have patients who would have a stroke or an injury where they couldn't move anything from the neck down. So, for example, I've had patients have a thing called locked-in syndrome. And with locked-in syndrome, what that means is their thinking abilities are fine and preserved, but they've lost all motor control. And the only thing that's usually preserved is ability to move their eyes up and down, sometimes left to right. Right? So you're almost locked in your body. Right?
This is like that Metallica video for that. You ever remember that?
Which one?
That darkness imprisoning me. All that I see.
Bruh, I noticed- I didn't- I
Absolute
really think I
horror.
saw the
I
video.
cannot live. Yeah. And it's a guy, a soldier who gets injured and he's stuck in his mind and he can't move his body.
Yeah. Dude, and it sounds terrifying, right?
It sounds horrifying.
Oh, it
yeah.
is. And there's a whole thing to get over that, right? So then we're like, well, how do they live in the world?
Yeah.
10, 15 years ago, not very well. But now with the advent of technology, there's this thing, I can't remember the exact word for it. So my speech therapists out there are going to, be disappointed in me. But it's a computer system where visually you calibrate it with their eyes. And it takes a lot of practice and trials to make sure it calibrates correctly and to get them used to using it. But you calibrate with their eyes, the computer catches it, their eye movements, and with their eye movements, they can then use the computer to do different things, surf the internet, type out words, communicate. If you have the means and the financial and everything else, control your home, turn on lights, turn off lights, lock the doors, unlock doors, right? Make phone calls, right?
Wow.
So that technology is cool,
Right.
right? And other technology I just started reading up on, so I don't even know a lot about it, so I don't want to talk too much about it. But it's we're looking into vaccinations for addiction, right? So essentially, what this is introducing vaccines, and what happens is these vaccines will increase these antibodies, and antibodies are things that combat things in your body that shouldn't be in there. And so if you introduce them, the thought is these antibodies will attack the effects of the substance we use in our body to give us those particular effects to cause addiction, right? So it never even has a chance to impact us, so that we don't get into that cycle.
Right. But what's scary about that is you're also probably affecting positive things, right? Because
And so that's the part I'm not. So again, that's kind of that where I'm excited, but I'm also a little nervous. Right. But I think that's natural anytime we're on the cusp and advent of that tipping point to new technology.
well, it's like it's like Universal Soldier.
Oh, with Van
Right?
Damme and Dolph Lundgren, you kidding me?
Yeah. Right. But that's what they had, these blockers in their system that wouldn't allow them to feel pain or have emotional responses to situations, so that they could be assigned a task and they would just do the task because they lacked that ability. Right?
And so back when that came out, was that 91, 92?
Yeah, it was a long
Right.
time ago. Yeah.
That was science fiction, right?
Right.
But now we think about it. If you take a human, right? We've done this with animal studies, and that amygdala, you knock out you have two of them. Our brain has pairs, left and right, most things. You knock out your amygdala, your amygdalitis for two. One is that fear response tends to go away. I think for a lot of it, right? So, for example, when you look at these, I think they're rhesus monkeys, when they cut out their amygdala, right? Before they did that, if a snake put a snake in their cage, they do what most of us do, man. They're getting away, they're afraid, they're scared.
Right.
Then they cut them out, and they put in there, and they go up and they just pick up the snake. They start looking at it, play with it. Right?
Whoa.
So, one, that fear response goes away. Two, you tend to be less aggressive.
Less aggressive.
Much more passive.
Whoa.
So that's kind of along that. Now, let's say we amplify the amygdala. So for animal studies, what they do is they'll put an electrode in there, like a very thin wire, and because our neurons communicate through electrical electro and chemical, right? And they start putting electricity, inducing it, and they activate those amygdala even more. Now they are much more fearful, but now their aggression goes way up.
Really?
Yeah. Right. So again, it's kind of like that universal soldier, right? And then there's also areas that's called periaqueductal gray. Peri means near aqueduct, because it's near aqueduct, which is a tube in your brain where this fluid goes through to cool your brain down and other things. And then gray because it's gray in color. That's where a lot of our pain is generated, those pain centers, whatever. So if you block that, theoretically, then you could block that pain.
Wow.
Right? So again, that's that technology. Like at once upon a time, it was science fiction, but
Right. Now, what about nanotechnology?
So
That sounds like some Marvel shit.
That it does. Like when I think nanotech, I think when Iron Man's suit, got way too ridiculous.
Right.
Everything was nanotech. If you couldn't explain
Yeah.
it, it was nanotech.
Yeah.
So I have no
It's
problem
like a
saying
plot hole fixer.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the nanotech. Where does the helmet come from? It's nanotech. Yeah.
exactly. It's like the, whenever one of the criticism of like religion and stuff with God is like if you couldn't explain it, it was God.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
But is nanotechnology an actual thing?
I have no problem with saying I have no idea.
Okay.
Like that is beyond my scope of competency, and I have no problem saying I don't know. But damn it, Wes, I'm gonna send me down a rabbit hole. My wife's gonna hate you because for the next week or two, I'm gonna just be hyper focused on
Nanotechnology.
Yes.
Yeah, and how they shape cognitive neuroscience and the future of neuropsychology.
So
as
I
a
wonder if he's
whole.
also talking, Elon Musk and like the. I forget what he calls it now, but he's looking for
Neuralink?
the Neuralink.
Yeah.
So that's another cool thing is now we're coming up with ways to our nerve cells are so complicated. But so let's take an amputee victim. Somebody's had the arm removed, right? One thing, there's a cool thing called, not cool for them, but it's called phantom pain, where your limb could be missing, but you still feel pain in that limb, right? Because those nerves at the end are still, your brain doesn't know. So now they're coming up with these devices where like you have not just a prosthetic, but they can link it to your
I've seen
neurons.
that. I've seen
Yeah.
video footage of people with those kind of prosthetics.
And your thoughts of now you can activate it, right?
Yeah, and it's a little hard for them. They kind of have to concentrate, but they can make a fist and open their hand or even try to grab something.
Yeah. And the more they do it, again, we talk about learning, the more those neurons form new connections,
Yeah.
right? Because you learn something new, and the more you do it, the stronger those connections get. And then before you know it, you're doing it without even thinking because those connections are so strong.
Yeah.
Right? It's like automatic. Same with addiction. Before we know,
Yeah. Wow. Man, this has been great.
Yeah.
Once again, thank you for making the giant trek down
Thank you for being
to make it
patient with
happen.
me, man.
Oh no, it's all good. It worked out great, and you know Clint's here, and we've always wanted to record something, so it worked out. Um, so, anything else before we close, crew? Who's freezing in the sanctuary?
I have a question if it's cool.
Yeah.
So like y'all kind of touched on it a little bit, but like they're saying people say like when you start using at a young age,
Mm-hmm.
you stop. Like so I've heard if you drink or use when you're 13, you stop maturing. Like you have the emotional
Intelligence of a.
intelligence of a 13-year-old.
Yeah. So the question from Zach, if it didn't come through the mic, is if you start using substances at a young age, does your emotional maturity stunt and stop at that point? Is that
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or like what are your thoughts on
Yeah. Yeah, it's a great question. What's your
that? I'm Zach.
Zach? Oh,
Zach.
hey, I'm
No,
Zach
Zach.
too. That's why I got confused. I was like,
Yeah.
okay,
There's usually another Zach here that's here
bro, that's
too.
too many
so,
Zachs, homie.
yeah.
Like, hey, hey, if he comes in, we got to form an alliance.
Yeah.
Now, what you're describing is arrested development, you know, and not the Jason Bateman show, Michael Cera, which is great, but
Right.
you know, it's called arrested development. Arrested means you've paused something, you stopped it. So if you get arrested, you're getting arrested because they're stopping you from doing whatever it was that you were doing, right? And your development. So what happens when you introduce substances to the brain that early, right? You have to think about when you were a kid. So when you're born with these neurons, by the time you're 5, around 4 or 5, you have all the neurons you're going to have, right? That 800 billion. You start off with more. But your brain will prune off the ones that aren't being used. You
That's
don't
a
need.
whole nother topic.
Yeah, it's a whole other topic. So you get around 5 years old.
Start off with more. Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of prunes the ones that way based on what you need to do and those kind of things. You know, it keeps things in ease. So when you're 5 or so, you got all your own needs. But what's going to happen is now from 5 on until about 25 for men, 18, 19 for women is now what's happening is those neurons are forming more connections. Right? So the more we learn, we start to learn how to read, we start to learn new words, we start to learn how to respond in certain social situations. We start to, you know, develop motor skills for sports and all these kind of things, or music, right? Forming all those connections are forming. We start to learn how to emotionally respond to certain situations, right? And how to identify those emotions and regulate them, right? That's what's happening through all this time. So when we introduce a substance during those early phases when all that's happening, you delay, slow down, or stop that process, right? So you're right. So what happens is it's getting away. Remember we talked about earlier about how people who, you know, for us when we are chronic users, is those frontal lobes, right, stop working as well.
Right.
Your frontal lobes aren't even fully developed at that age,
Yeah.
right? That's why that whole thing is like, really, our frontal lobes for men aren't developed really till like 22 through 25, but at 18 we can do, you know, go to
Right. Yeah.
right? So not only are they still developing, now you've delayed that development. So that's why you see people who are older, right, that do seem to be more immature, more overreactive emotionally, right, because the parts that are responsible for managing that personality behavior and everything else is your frontal lobes, and they didn't get a chance to develop the way they needed to.
That explains a lot because I started doing meth at 13.
Yeah. Oh, man, that hits a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was talking to someone recently, and I said, I think that shit messed me up. You know?
It's in your head.
But I do. Yeah, I think the young age, because now I feel like with 12 years, I feel like I'm starting to now get shit,
Mm-hmm. Like what? You mind me asking?
like emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
the ability to self-regulate, to talk myself down when my emotion raises up, or to identify negative thought and go, oh, I don't need to follow that.
Yeah.
Like, thanks, but no thanks. But it took me a really long time to get that, and I think I was just guessing. I was thinking, I think it's because I used drugs so young that it's taken me longer now to kind of to build these networks and these connections, because they weren't really fully formed or didn't even form at all.
No, not only were they not being formed because the drug was stopping it, but at the same time, when you're using, what are you not doing?
You're not managing emotions or feeling anything. I mean, that was what was great about meth. It was like you're a freaking robot, right?
Exactly.
I was gonna say even without drugs and alcohol, even like with gangbanging and stuff like
Yep.
that takes
Yeah.
away from all of like living it.
Yeah.
I say for me, right?
Yeah.
I'm learning now that here at 60 years old, I don't know what I'm doing.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I'm chaotic. I started gangbanging at a young age. I started using drugs at a young age, and all of that to now to 60 years old and not knowing. I just had a good experiment out there this time, but it's not that's not conducive to somebody if you don't recognize it.
Yeah.
And thank God I caught it. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
It took what it took for me to really see some of
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I only seen a little bit of it. I can imagine like paying bills and going to, having an apartment and having a place and having a car and paying insurance. I mean, that's just
Yeah.
major stuff to me.
There is.
I'm like, man, wait, you know what I mean?
Right.
And it goes into panic mode. And what do you go back to? Music or drugs
Yep.
Or behaviors. Yeah.
The stuff dude. There's so much we could unpack on that. What was your name, by the way? Tony. Thanks for sharing that, man. There's so much to unpack with that, Tony. So first off, it's some of those things like you never learned how to do, right? So I always tell like athletes stuff. I also consult for improving athletic performance, athletic performance stuff through neuropsychology and all that. So one of the things is I tell people is like if you haven't seen it, you can't achieve it, right? So in environment, those kind of things, like if you've never seen those kind of things happen, like I grew up where we're kind of poor and everything. We're in, my brothers and weren't because they're older. But so if you don't see those things, how would you even know how to do them? So when you get to an age where, one, you're coming off substances, right? So now your mind's actually clear enough to even consider that stuff. Two, you've actually never seen it done. So how are you supposed to know? But then, yeah, you're guessing. But that guessing should have happened when you were younger, right? That trial and error or somebody guiding you, right?
Right. Like in your 20s or
Yeah.
in your teens. Right.
Yeah, right? Yeah.
Right.
And then what adds to the stigma is people who don't understand that because they don't have that message behind her, they just can be like, dude,
What's wrong with
what's
him?
wrong? Yeah, there's something wrong with him. It's a you thing. It's not like everything else that unfortunately you had to be faced with, right? Like you didn't choose most of that stuff, right?
Yeah.
The thing is like gangbanging, man. So like the thing with gangbanging, like when you grow up like that, right? So when you grow up time, right? That amygdala is always firing, right? Always firing, which means your cortisol, that stress level we're talking about, is always up. And that frontal cortex thing from developing, it also starts to make it smaller. So one, you're slowing down its development, and you're also hindering it. Right? So you got the double whammy, right?
Yeah.
And then you add that on top of it, man, and it becomes just the perfect recipe for chaos, man, right? And so then it's when people say like, well, why can't you just stop? It's like you don't even have to because of all that, the things you need to without getting help, right? The things you need to problem solve and come up with ways out of it, those tools you don't have.
You just didn't develop
You
it.
didn't develop them, right?
Yeah.
So again, I love it when these stories like this because it takes that stigma and that onus off of the person, right? And it says, hey, you have a right to have these feelings, like I said, but instead of directing them at the person, that's not what you're upset with, that's not what you're mad at, that's not what you're disgusted about, whatever. What you need to direct it at is all of these things that contributed to it, that we can have empathy for this person, sympathy and compassion.
Right.
And as a Christ follower also, that's what we're called to do,
Yeah.
right? But you can't do that until you understand it.
Yeah.
And that's why I love these kind of talks to kind of get out there,
Amen.
And so I tell Tony, like I tell everybody else, like I've told myself, wasn't your fault. But the thing you're realizing is now is your responsibility and you're trying with a lot of help.
Yeah.
Just need
Amen.
it.
Yeah. Dude, what a great interview, brother. We got
Hey,
some good clips out of that for sure.
Appreciate it, man. Appreciate
Let's
it.
see if we can take our TikToks up to 5,000 so we
Bruh.
can start a TikTok shop. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, Chris, my wife told me about that. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I have Facebook and that's about it. And I get on there just to check out most times some woodworking groups and sobriety groups and stuff. But I was like, she was talking like I always told you to do. It's like, well, I don't even know how to make a TikTok video.
Well, don't worry. We're going to make a lot out of it. So thank you for everyone for watching. And thank you for Zach for making the trip out here.
Anytime.
This is the Most High Show. I'll create an intro separately. Kind of lay it out. I'll record something. Woo!